Hello, ladies and gentlemen. A very warm welcome to the Blue Mountains International Hotel Management School's 30th anniversary special webinar event, the Global Perspective Series. Over the last few weeks, we've been in conversation with senior hoteliers from across the globe discussing how there is much optimism as we emerge from the health pandemic. Hotels are focused on rebuilding and skilling their workforce while considering how innovation successfully introduced over the last 18 months will become part of post-COVID operations. My name's Gareth, and I'm one of the success coaches and industry consultant for the school. And in the spirit of reconciliation, Torrens University Australia and the Blue Mountains International Hotel Management School acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea, and community. We pay our respects to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. So today, our series has taken us on a journey that started way back in New Delhi. We then headed off to Singapore, on to Dubai, and 2 weeks ago, we were in Jakarta. The composition and aim of the series has been to talk to leaders who have successfully led and been part of a fantastic team who have navigated their hotels through the last 2 years and are now ready to embrace a resurgence in tourism and hospitality in those regions and globally through their groups. We've also identified and shared as to why a career in hotel management is now more important and more rewarding than it ever has been. As we have done over the last few weeks as well, we will of course be hosting a Q&A at the end of the session, so please feel free to insert any questions that you may have, and we will get to those at the end of the first chapter of today's event. So for this week, and our final episode of the series, we are off to the beautiful 620-room Hyatt on the Bund in Shanghai. Aligned with the bend and staring straight down Shanghai's main artery, the Hongpu River, it is flanked to the right by the classical architecture of the Bund from the colonial era, and to the left by the glassy futurism of the Pudong Financial District. Our guest is a 25-year veteran with Hyatt Hotels and Resorts. Starting off his career back in 1996 in his hometown, the city of Saints in Adelaide, he has gone on to have stints in a number of key Asia-Pacific cities, including Melbourne, Hong Kong, Tokyo, Osaka, Hangzhou, and more recently, in his current role as the General Manager of the Hyatt on the Bund in Shanghai for the last 5 years. Passionate about people, customer experience, business strategy, his international experience across China and the ASPAC region allows him to bring a strategic insight into the market and what is to come in the region. Mr. Foxwell, a very, very good afternoon, sir. Ni hao, how are you?
Ni hao, Gareth. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for that warm introduction. And a very good afternoon to the ladies and gentlemen in the audience. I'm super excited and honored to be here. It's a real privilege to speak with you. And I'd like to thank you all also for inviting me into your world for this time that we have together.
One of the great things about, I guess, if anything in the last 18 months is how small the world is, even more so in this world of Zoom and Teams and all that kind of stuff now for sure. And it's really great for us to kind of, as an international hotel management school, to actually, bring those leaders into the class in an environment like this. So, Mark, thank you very, very much in that regard. So I guess to kind of kick it all off, can you give us a kind of a quick day in the life and an overview, obviously, of your current role and what you love about that?
Yes, absolutely. So day in life for me is very much a balance of administrative management, of course, strategic planning and so forth, meeting with key team members to enact our strategy and making sure that it is successfully delivered. But the other side of the day is simply walking around, being present in the hotel. I spend, first thing in the morning is always checking the public areas and just, perhaps shaking a few hands, meet a few key guests that are in-house, acknowledge and chat with team members. And it's this sort of managing by walking around that is often so, it pays such dividends because you see things that are happening, of course. You are very active and the teams know that you're very active and supportive of what they are doing. And it also allows for impromptu conversations to have, whether it's with colleagues or guests, where I'm constantly learning from them about their insights, the challenges that they may be having, areas that I didn't know that I could be of support, and now I realize that we can do something to help and to correct the situation. So as much as often the job is a bit desk bound or meeting room bound, and that's necessary to plan and to make sure that you're effectively moving forward as a business enterprise, in terms of the operation of the hotel, I think you and I, in our experience, Gareth, have always been very hands-on and enjoy that. So back to what, your point of what is so my favorite part of the job, or what is so attractive about it, it's the people. And that's what engaged me from my first days as a bell attendant and through my career progression up until now. It's that engagement with great people, again, guests, colleagues, all stakeholders, owners, and being able to learn from them, share with them, and that, feed your energy and motivation to go forward from day to day.
And all starting with a quick run in the morning, because I know you're very heavily into your marathons and all that kind of stuff as well.
I've been very lucky to have some good, I run along the Bund, for example, is a fantastic way to start the mornings. And I've had some very scenic locations in my past postings in that regard. So that's kind of helped. Yes, that's been great.
Super. Awesome. So, I guess one element we're obviously discussing in these sessions as well is obviously, we're looking at various countries and how the COVID disruption has really been, obviously implementing and kind of, in many ways kind of changing the markets in those regions. And I kind of wanted to rewind the clock going back to January this year. And, the incredible team over at STR Revenue, whom all hoteliers and us in education have been following over the last 2 years through their presentations, and in particular, by Matthew Burke down here in Australia and Jasper Palmquist out of the STR office in Singapore. Yeah, and in an article that was published at the start of the year summarizing 2020, they said, and I quote, speaking about China specifically, that mainland China occupancy fell to as low as 12.4% in February 2020. By October that year, however, occupancy was back up to 65.6%, which was just as 3.6% decrease compared with that same month in 2019, the year before. In September, the market then posted a 62.9 occupancy level, which was actually an increase year over year for that period since May 2019. So across the country, we saw performance highest on Wednesdays and Thursdays during 2020, during that strong corporate demand returning. And, in August 2020 in particular, these 2 days of the week, they produced market highest occupancy, across the country of having about 70.2 to 71% respectively. Whereas on a Sunday and Monday were the days where, obviously, as it generally always is in hotels, even before COVID, Sundays and Mondays were always kind of the lowest for occupancy. And for those of us here today, it is a fact that actually prior to COVID, and for those on the call that didn't actually realize this, but travel and tourism and the roles that hotel industry plays in China is massive for the Chinese economy, and specifically that of Shanghai. And according to an article when I was doing some research and looking at Business Wire back in 2018, that the travel and tourism sector contributed 11% of the country's GDP, which was actually higher than the global average the year before in 2017 of 10.4%. Shanghai itself is among the top 3 most visited provinces in the regions in China, and with a population of over 24 million people. So, based on that, and sharing the next slide, which shows how the various markets and regions and by the different classes of hotel segments remain very much in awe of the rest of the world for this year that we're in. In many ways, and I know we touched on this when we had a chat on Monday, but that zero cases stance and the population really kind of being that domestic travel within the country is just incredible. And it's clearly working. And so much so that Hyatt's development is, and which I've got on the next slide here, just to kind of show the students and for those that are watching today as well. But it's looking very, very interesting with 80 hotels in the pipeline across China, still on course to go ahead, and 21 of those being in and around Shanghai itself. So what have been your own key learnings over this time, and has that changed or altered your leadership style in any way through that, Mark?
Absolutely. It has evolved my leadership style, of course. To speak to, as you mentioned, looking at Hyatt's development pipeline, along with other hotel companies, of course, generally, companies remain quite optimistic about the China market. That is for sure. Now, the zero case strategy can be something of a double-edged sword at times. It does lead to a bit of volatility in our business forecasts and meeting, expectations one week can change very much the next week, depending on where there may have been a case identified and how that affects travel to or from that province and so forth, feeder markets and so forth coming into it. So on that note, I think I think the word agility these days probably gets overused, but we just have to get used to being uncomfortable. My leadership style has always been, I've always aimed to be collaborative and very people-driven, empathetic, you might say. And I think having that empathy is just more, it's always important. And the sense of how central that is to successful leadership is just, I think, being magnified, I would say. So that means a lot of things, of course. It means looking after your team and understanding their needs and those of other stakeholders, your guests, your owners. But it also means being able to act very quickly on that understanding, on that insight. And if it's a business insight that you're seeing, you don't wait for 3 months for a trend to occur. A trend occurs over the course of 1 week, and you think, okay, this is where the business is going for this foreseeable stage. So we need to make adjustments to that. So you have to be very again used to feeling uncomfortable and just in the sense that, which is quite an exciting thing, because it's never going to be sort of entering a status quo, so as it were, where, okay, it's just business as usual now and we're going on with it. You're always looking at the market, you're always with your team, you're always very engaged, identifying areas that you may have to pivot or adjust a little bit, new distribution channels. And on that front, the obviously throughout the world, China, it's just so much more so than anywhere. The operation within a digital ecosystem, it just becomes hand in hand with how you do business as well. So adjusting to all of these constantly evolving, factors that are impacting how we do things and what we are doing is very interesting and exciting, but a constant. You're on top of it from day to day, that's for sure.
And I mean, there's even further excitement on the horizon. The Winter Olympics is just around the corner as well. And, in the Beijing area, and indeed, most likely, I'm sure there's going to be a lot more scrutiny with what we witnessed in Tokyo and all of those things earlier this year. And in a bizarre way, this bubble that China's kept itself in with that zero stance, as you just said, has that kind of, because over the last few weeks when we've spoken, I think if I was to relate it back to Amit Rana, who we spoke to in the first week, and obviously Amit's in New Delhi, and we were kind of saying, has kind of comparing and looking at what the change in guest preferences and confidence has been with that. But I think almost just as important is the employee kind of confidence as well. So have you found that there's been any adjustments in both of the guest and the team member in that regard?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right to align those two perspectives. I think it's hand in hand for our guests and our colleagues. That is for sure. And the leadership expectations, rightly so, are to serve both those stakeholder needs. That's crucially important to get that clear from the beginning. And we at Hyatt, we have worked toward that alignment for many years now, actually. But this really brings it out more vividly than ever. And that we talk here about, it's kind of the Maslow's hierarchy kind of effect. You're starting with basic safety. Am I safe? Am I being looked after? Can I go to work without risk of infection or other challenges that I might be faced? So, like many companies, we have just upped the ante, in a huge way on hygiene and cleanliness measures initially, and continuing, of course, now. And much of this, I think, is good. It's here to stay to some extent. When things really normalize, you might see less signage about it or less sort of overt signs of what's being done, just to reassure guests that this elevator is being disinfected on an hourly basis. This restaurant has been disinfected before opening, et cetera, et cetera. There will just be a given, I think, that's the sort of level of care that we take. And that's certainly, I think, what people are expecting. And again, I think this is clear to everybody in the audience, and I'm sure has been spoken about previously. But the shift toward a holistic sense of wellness and what that means for people is also, I think people have had time to reflect and think and reprioritize what's most meaningful in their lives. And we all understand that caring for ourselves and each other, and I say caring for yourself because you need to do that first so you can be the best you can be for others. That's crucial. If I don't get enough sleep for a whole week and I end up making bad decisions that affect my team, that's a problem. So, you need to prioritize yourself as well so that you can have the chance to support the needs of others around you.
And I think obviously with Hyatt's, values and the mission of, caring for people so that they can be their best as well. I think, never more so in what we've all been through now has that message, really kind of been so really valuable and very much something to be kind of clinging on to in that regard. Most definitely. And I was kind of going to touch on about what the Hyatt as a group are looking at those initiatives, and I think you've kind of already touched on those there in that regard. But do you think and do you feel that the enthusiasm around the market? Do you think that probably, and again, I know in China it's very different at the moment, and we were saying on Monday about, and we spoke about it now about the 0 cases, etc. But is there any kind of perspective or on the ground there in China, is there any kind of news about when international travel will kind of start coming back to kind of further increase the market?
I think to comment on international travel at the moment is a little bit difficult. You mentioned the Beijing Olympics, and many people anecdotally seen that as a sort of a marker of, if that can successfully execute, then we may see more a sense of sort of relief and opening up in the period following that time. But again, it's quite speculative at the moment. Of course, there is a genuine enthusiasm for travel domestically within the market, both from a leisure perspective. School holiday periods, etc., are very, very busy for us, which is wonderful. And from a corporate and meetings perspective, there's really an eagerness to get going. And this is where I talk about this sort of roller coaster effect that we have, because it has really been in fits and starts where you see, an amazing base of group room nights coming up for the coming month, a lot of inquiries, a lot of activity. And then if there might be some cases in a very key market that put restrictions around that market, and from a corporate perspective, the companies have to do the responsible thing and say, okay, we have to postpone this, or we can't travel, or we have to cancel it, or whatever it might be. And so suddenly you see this wash of business coming out, but clearly they want to be able to get into it. So I think with vaccination rates being very high in China now, so it's a very different, the last 9 months have been a very important transition toward what our next stage of normality will be. And I think that instills a lot of confidence for people, but still you don't want to get caught up in the machinery of quarantine and what have you if you just happen to have been in a medium or high risk area at the wrong time. So when those things come up, these dynamics come into play, a lot of companies, as I mentioned before, will sort of take a sit back and wait approach just for the time being. So it always feels kind of short term, those lulls or those delays in business. And when the opportunities come, when it feels clear, the opportunity, the inquiries start to come through pretty quickly. But we all know it can change again quickly as well. So it's sort of navigating these choppy seas a bit at the moment. But having said that, the business is there. We always have business. It's a matter of how good it is or isn't. So little to complain about on that front. That's for sure.
Yeah, because talking about that of how it can just change so quickly, and on that slide we had up a couple of seconds ago, I think Sanya in the Hainan province was a really kind of key one of that earlier on in this year, where it was around the holiday period, and then
incredible story there. Yes,
everything kind of got shut down so quickly, and then people weren't actually able to leave the province. So therefore, the hotel market still was very, very strong because obviously everybody was not able to leave. And then obviously that 2 week period shot through, they were then able to leave, and then obviously the occupancy then dropped so heavily after that. So yeah, it's a very, very, very strange kind of way of working. And I know when we caught up earlier in the week, and we actually, we spoke about a mutual connection there in Jeffrey Ryan down there, who's the area general manager for IHG down there, and he was saying, that for IHG across up until kind of the more recent waves that have happened, but IHG, they were having, an average occupancy across all of their 400 plus hotels in China of having about 65% as an average. So, I mean, it's just so very different. Whereas, here in Australia, with what we've obviously had so different, and we look at markets like, in the subcontinent, and you then look at somewhere like the Middle East now, where in Dubai, they've had this kind of very kind of gradual return of occupancy since September in 2020, especially from the Eastern European market, and then nothing kind of after Ramadan earlier this year, forecasts very little, and then suddenly we get to Expo 2020, and it's insane. It's through the roof. You have Lena Willoughby, who joined us from Marriott, who's a cluster talent acquisition manager there. She was saying that they hired 180 interns in the 3 weeks prior to us having that call a few weeks ago. So it's just so incredible to see how in each region everything is so different. And I think if I'm kind of talking about employees and putting that focus back on the associates there, would I be right in understanding that obviously from an associate concern, there hasn't been that level of redundancies and those kinds of things that other areas in the globe have been through over the last 18 months?
No, that's true, Gareth. We haven't had to face such situation here, very fortunately. We got down in the very early stages to, like, we're talking like February, March 2020, to sort of 6-7% occupancy. So there was definitely a sort of a hold on sort of stage for a while there. And then as things slowly improved, it was very gradual at the early stages to see that occupancy build up again. And just in terms of maintaining at least necessary liquidity to keep the operation running, keep the lights on, and keep everybody employed, we certainly had to make some sacrifices, at least in terms of month to month. Do we work sort of a 3-day week, and instead of getting paid for a 5-day week or a 2-day week even, and so forth, just to know that we were just sort of doing what we could to help the business and keep things stable. So fortunately, we've been able to come out the other side of that. Things have relatively normalized. Our headcount is certainly lower by some measure compared to 2019 at this moment. But that's not to say that we don't have the manning. It's just that through natural turnover and people doing different things, we're just trying to manage the business levels as is appropriate to what we have on books at the moment. But again, we can see that improving, particularly if we start looking further into 2022 now.
And are there contingencies that I suppose this is more of an HR question, but those contingencies kind of in re-engaging those people that have left to maybe come back? Is there kind of already a bit of a plan of looking how do we get those people back, etc., potentially?
Absolutely. What we've found, though, is that most of those that have chosen to pursue other opportunities have done that so outside of the hotel industry. So while we always have that sort of Hyatt DNA, once Hyatt, always Hyatt kind of approach. So there's always a connection there. We also support people to explore different avenues in their lives if that's what they're looking for. And many of those that have moved to other hotels have done so within our property, our family of sister properties, again, to pursue maybe some advancement or some new experiences. So, and we're a big hotel here, so we always have opportunities to welcome people back, that's for sure.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I mean, I think kind of segueing that, kind of talking about the associates and everything, we, at the moment, we've got approximately 110 students that are back home in China, and obviously spread very much across the country. And when I was looking at the report yesterday morning, from the info that we've got about 5 of them that are in Shanghai. And I guess for those watching right now and the recording that is to follow, what would you say to those students about working back home at the moment? And with as you all know, obviously very well, with hotel management degrees, there is always a placement that is part of that. And We've been kind of chatting to a lot of our students about, really kind of from the careers and employability team, we're really looking to say to our students that, if there is an opportunity to get one's foot in the door with that brand that you want to work with in Australia and have that experience, what would you say to those looking to complete those placements and that work back home? And, I think standing there as a general manager, obviously of one of the largest hotels in Shanghai right now, would you say that is a right decision for them to undertake that in those steps?
I think to undertake a placement in particularly if you're in a major city in China, and to build that foundation of experience in an area that also gives you some sort of comfort zone somehow, at least some familiarity, that you can actually really find your feet and get your teeth into it. I think that's always going to be seen as a very attractive thing internationally. So although I'm Australian, for example, my experience in Shanghai here or Hangzhou before this is seen as an attractive asset in terms of experience and cultural diversity and so forth. And I think it works in the other way as well. I think a hotel looking to bring talent into their property on a more permanent basis would look on that kind of experience and that willingness also to do the work, to get your hands dirty from an early stage, because I think that's always very important in hospitality, that you can show your enthusiasm for actually the work and the job and the industry itself. This is what is seen as favorable, I think, for employers. So it's either you're sort of talking about a placement, which is a very important experience, but then that would lead into permanent employment, which is something even more meaningful or even more, has more mileage in it, I would say. And then you have choices then about, do you spend, 6 months or 2 years or more in one place, and then perhaps an opportunity once you're in that system to be able to progress to other locations and diversify your experience.
And I think, yourself being an example of that, of where you work in, even if you're kind of going from Australia up into Asia, or even coming from China down to here, if you get your foot in the door, and you already know those operations and processes, because it doesn't matter, again, I'm just speaking again as somebody who worked with Hyatt as well. If you work at any kind of Regency, Park, Grand, or anything like that, anywhere in the world, the processes and operations are exactly the same. Yes, you might have the different culture, the different kind of guests that you deal with. But I guess if you've already got your foot and you understand those operations and you've got those transferable skills and that knowledge to then arrive in Melbourne and start working at Grand Hyatt Melbourne or Park Hyatt Melbourne, etc. If you've already been working at Park Shanghai or at the Grand in the Jim Mao Tower, or with yourselves even as well at the Bund, and that's being able to do that.
Yes. Yeah. And you can point to many examples of that having occurred. And, Australia in particular, as you know, is such a melting pot culturally, and diversity is in the truest sense, is valued and welcomed. It brings different perspectives. It brings different skill sets. It brings, whether it's language or cultural insights or simply ways of working that maybe are new to those that are more, who are from the location being in question. So these are actually strengths that give you, even more solid foundation from which to work from in future.
No, super. Thank you, Mark. Thank you very, very much for that. I could keep going on and asking questions galore myself, but I do want to open it up to the floor for questions to come through. And the first question that I've got actually is from one of my colleagues who he's basically said, coming to an end of 2021, what is the RevPAR and the ADR forecast for the hotel in 2022, and how does this compare to those pre-COVID figures?
Yes, so that's this has been a tricky one to manage. I think in the absence of an international market, particularly a hotel like ourselves, which has always been very, had a quite an international focus, in addition to the strong domestic market here. There is such a kind of a competition on pricing. It's very competitive. It's quite aggressive at this moment. And I can understand, because the domestic consumers are looking for value, as anybody would be, a lot, whether it's leisure or a lot of the corporates is more like SMEs and smaller businesses and so forth. So, they're not necessarily traveling with the budgets of Apple or other sort of key accounts that we might have had coming from Europe and the US and other places. So we've had to adapt to that, of course, and rightly so. If we want to build volume, it needs to be in a different segment of whether it's corporate or whichever segmentation than we had looked at previously. So to answer the question, if we were looking at average rates of say 1,200 RMB, we might be looking more around 900 at this moment, because we have rates in there now that are like 700 or 800 for some of these smaller volume accounts, whereas they would have been looking at 1,000 or 1,100 previously. So it just gives you some idea of the adjustment, and similarly with the leisure travel as well. Unless you're really looking at a peak national holiday night, it's difficult to really yield, at least from a bar rate perspective anyway. But as a hotel, we have the opportunity to leverage some of our differentiating strengths, such as the views from the hotel. If we talk about rooms, that we can seek a premium on those room types, which are always very, very popular. So obviously there are ways that we try to mitigate these sort of value challenges. I think to grow from this point, it's going to be a very gradual process, even if and when borders open up. It's going to take a little bit of time to really get back to pre sort of 2019 levels from a rate perspective, at least.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's a really, really good insight. Thanks, Mark. And then one of our students is asking, having a career that's been spanning over multiple different countries, how is the hotel industry and managing hotels differently in China compared to the other countries that you've worked in?
So I came to China after around having had about eight years in Japan, which was a wonderful experience. I adored my experience working in Japan. But my first week or so in Hangzhou, and I'm speaking to the team, I said, so what about, like, can we talk about maybe we try this? And the team are just like, oh, okay, let's try it. No problem. I'm like, really? We can just do it? Like, it was, this sense of energy and how dynamic the not just the markets, but from a people perspective, the culture is just so energized and dynamic. And I just loved it, because I can tell you, in Japan, if you want to make a change about something, it's not the easiest thing. It takes a lot of discussion and getting everybody on board and so forth, which is fine. There are reasons for that, culturally speaking, but and once you get there, then it's going to be done very well, for sure. But just that you can adapt quickly in China has been, I think, a big part of the success that you have pointed to previously, Gareth, in terms of dealing with and somewhat recovering from this trauma that the world has experienced over the last 2 years. So to answer the question again, in terms of the differences in China, I think a lot of it has to do with the sort of can-do approach. I think sometimes it means you have to keep a closer eye on things to some extent, because some things can go a little bit off, not quite the direction that you really would like to see or had intended. People can use their initiative a little bit more, which is, again, very good and welcome. But it means obviously sometimes you have to think, hang on, this person is maybe going in a little bit of a direction that's not quite what we want. So we'll just help them to get back on track and learn from what they're going through. So in that sense, it's a little bit different. But yeah, overall, I just have to point to the energy and dynamism of the environment.
That's awesome, man. Having been to China myself back in 2013 and seeing, I stayed at the Jimao at the Grand Hyatt and everything, and yeah, it's another world. It really, really is. We got time for one more, which is from one of our Japan students. Actually, she's just sent it to me on the side, and she says, "Mr. Mark, thank you very much for your time today. I came in commencing my course feeling a little bit hesitant about this career I was looking to go into, and as about the career pursuit in hospitality and the perspective of the opportunities. So, as a general manager of a hotel, what 3 pieces of advice could you offer me and my classmates for our future, particularly considering the last 2 years that we have been through?"
Yeah, I spoke earlier about. I don't want to sound too fluffy here, but I think you have to start with empathy, as I've spoken about before. This means really understanding your stakeholders and their individual needs, and then how you can serve those needs. So that comes from obviously a hospitality perspective. Of course, when we talk about guests, we all know that guests are individual and have different needs from one to the other. But it goes with co-workers and colleagues. As I mentioned before about owners. When you're developing your career, you're managing up as well a lot, and as you progress, you start to manage down, but you're still managing up as well. I'm of course managing up a lot. And understanding what it is that those stakeholders really are looking for, and how you can help them, how you can show your value to them in ways that are meaningful to them, is always going to serve you well, and is in fact central to what we do. So that's number one. Number two is, I think, as speaks to some points that we've covered already, and that's in terms of challenging boundaries. Be ready to ask questions. Don't just receive wisdom without sort of critically thinking about it, and what's right today need to be rethought tomorrow anyway, just because it's working this minute. Especially in this world, we've learned that so much that next week we might have to pivot on a certain thing that we track that we were taking. So, and I think this relates to running the business and learning about the profession of working in hotels, but also what is for yourself as well. I think these 3 points that I'm speaking about all come back to yourself individually first. Understand yourself, have empathy for yourself, challenge yourself, question your boundaries and what you're capable of doing, because you can often stretch a lot more than you realize that you can until you've actually been through the experience. And the third thing, again, relating to yourself, but certainly in terms of how you approach your hospitality from a professional perspective, is to think and act strategically. So it sort of goes back a little bit to the challenging boundaries, but just, have a plan and be willing to reassess that plan as you go. So things don't just happen by themselves, following one thing after another thing without some sort of predetermined idea of, okay, I want to try to get to that point. So if I want to try to get to achievement of the budget this month, how do I do that? What are the pieces I need for that to happen? If I want to progress to a certain role it requires some more technical skills or more leadership skills, how do I acquire those skills and then demonstrate to my management that I possess and can execute those skills to get me to that position? So these are different ways to approach it, but I think there's these 3 things: is again, empathy, question and challenge boundaries, and third is have a strategy and have a way of actually enacting that and following through.
Well, I'm inspired. I'm tempted to get back in the game. Thanks, Mark. No, a wonderful insight, and I know we've gone a little bit over time as well. But Mark, thank you very, very much for your insight today and for your time. Certainly a lot for us to digest and I think, again, with so much excitement and promise to come, over the next couple of months and the years coming. So thank you very, very much for your time this afternoon, Mark. I really, really appreciated it.
Pleasure, Gareth. Thank you again for inviting me into your space, for all of you. And as you say, it's certainly a very exciting time. I think things are on the cusp of some big things to come. So it's a good chance to get in there and have fun with it. Awesome.
Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes our final episode of our Global Perspective series for 2021. We're excited to take the series into 2022 as well. And as our incredible industry recovers globally and gets back on track. And again, a huge thank you to all of our 5 guests over the last few weeks as well: Amit, Sophie, Lena, Gaylord, and Mark today. To our industry partners who have joined us as well, we thank you for sharing that journey with us. To the students, it's week 8 of term, so keep the assessments going. I know we're all due very, very shortly, etc. But most importantly, it's all about going forth and conquering. So the world of being a hotelier is a wonderful adventure, and there is just so much more to come. We wish you a pleasant end to the week. Stay safe, stay well, and we will chat to you all very, very soon. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.